Aztlan. According to legend, this was the home and the creation of a people called the Mexica, otherwise known as the Aztecs in our history books. This legendary home has been mentioned in several ethno-historical sources that were taken from ancient Aztec priests. It depicts lists of different tribal groups that lived with the Aztecs, as well as a very significant migration from Aztlan to central Mexico. If this place existed, this might suggest that the Aztecs were part of a very ancient civilization, thousands of years before they came into power in Mexico. The trail of breadcrumbs begins at, arguably, the time of Atlantis.
The Mexica, or Aztecs, have various traditions about their point of origin and about the timing of this event. Some of them have no dates at all and probably go back many, many thousands of years, arguably even to the time of Atlantis, 11,500 years ago.
If we go back about 11,000 years ago, we're talking about a time of an enormous flood suddenly overwhelmed the Earth, huge catastrophe. There was fire came down from the sky, parts of a meteorite crashed upon the Earth, and this changed the whole structure of the Earth as we know it today. We're talking about a huge story of multiple nations who survived in small numbers this huge catastrophe 11,000 years ago, and then populated the tribes that we know today. So the Anasazi, the Hopi, the Navajo, the Aztec, who then became the Mexica. All of these peoples are little sort of crumbs of original people that survived a very ancient catastrophe.
Could a cataclysm 11,000 years ago have spurred a migration of mass proportions that separated these tribes into different areas? The legend of the Aztecs suggests that their people began their journey from a red canyon with 4 rivers. Dr. Cecilio Orozco of California State University, Fresno, set out to confirm the actual location of Aztlan. On March 24, 1990, Dr. Orozco published an astonishing conclusion. By cross-referencing the description of the land where the Mexica came from, Orozco was able to pinpoint the location of their homeland, Utah. More specifically, the Four Corners region, where the borders of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico all converge.
He came across a glyph that was a dead-on perfect representation of an Aztec glyph that he knew of that contained a mathematical code, and that mathematical code alludes to the Venusian cycle, the cycle of Venus. Because of that, he decided that the Four Corners area must be their place of origin. The Nahua people, which is where the Aztecs came from, also claim that they came from a place of the Four Great Waters. Well, in the Four Corner region, you have the Four Great Waters. You have the Green River coming out of Wyoming, the Colorado River coming out of Colorado, the San Juan River. With the 3 main rivers and then mixing together, that's the Four Great Waters that they were discussing.
When people started trying to understand what was the source of the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Anasazi, the Hopi, were they related? Were there different streams? One of the interesting parts of this was the mythology behind the Aztecs, that their origin source was a place where there were 4 rivers that intersected.
If there are several tribes reported to be from this ancient area, does this also mean they originated from the same knowledge? There was another interesting clue that Dr. Orozco and his team found. They suggested that these symbols represented the Venusian cycle and are also connected to one of the Aztec gods, Quetzalcoatl.
Quetzalcoatl was the astrological equivalent of Venus. And when you study ancient cultures, the movements of Venus are extremely important for not only the planting of crops, but they could tell the cycles of time from the movements of Venus. The movements of Venus around our star are so precise that you can literally time everything by them in a society or a culture. And when you look at the ancient Egyptian culture In the Sumerian culture, the movements of Venus always take on an extremely important role.
So it's highly probable that, yes, there are certain symbols in certain caves around Utah that do specifically tie in with a lot of the Mayan calendars, a lot of their images of Quetzalcoatl, one of their central god figures. But at the same time, these symbols are also shared by other cultures as well. So they're not just inherent in the Aztec culture, they're also shared by the Anasazi and the Hopi, the Navajo, the Apache, and so forth.
Is Quetzalcoatl the missing link in the mystery of Aztlan? And could his symbol be universal in the lineage of all the different civilizations of ancient America and possibly ancient Sumer? Author Anton Parks believes Quetzalcoatl could have an ancient link to the Sumerian god Enki. Based on his research, he discovered that Enki left Sumer and resided in Egypt. When he came to Egypt, he became Osiris. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Osiris was then killed by Set and resurrected by his wife Isis as the son Horus. Horus then revenges his father's death.
Sumérien et également égyptien. Horus profite de la venue de Vénus dans le ciel pour livrer bataille. Ça, c'est un point
In some Sumerian texts, but also in Egyptian ones, Horus takes advantage of the fact that Venus appears in the sky to start the fight. That is interesting because the link between Horus and Venus is quite clear. Horus manages to defeat Set in an epic battle. When Horus finally defeats Set, he completely disappears from Egyptian texts. I think that I found his trace in America, near Mexico, under the name Quetzalcoatl. I think that he wanted to leave the Sumerian and Egyptian gods' heavy atmosphere to create his own community where he will be called Quetzalcoatl. We also find traces of him a little further down, such as in Peru, under the name Viracocha. I believe when he flees to America, he isolates himself, he transforms into this wise character, has a whole community around him, and he calls himself Quetzalcoatl.
Among the Aztecs, whose beliefs are the best documented in many historical sources, Quetzalcoatl was related to gods of the wind, of the planet Venus, of the dawn, and of crafts and knowledge.
Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, the feathered serpent, is the civilizer deity of ancient Central America. He's remembered most for that, for bringing the gifts of civilization and for teaching a doctrine of peace and love.
Quetzalcoatl essentially becomes a father figure to humanity. He shows people how to do things properly, how to build temples, how to navigate, how to basically set the motions in life that create a fundamental basis from which you can adapt a very civilized lifestyle.
The earliest iconographic depiction of the deity is believed to be found on Stela 19 at the Olmec site of La Venta, depicting a serpent rising up behind a person probably engaged in a shamanic ritual. This depiction is believed to have been made around 900 BC.
His teachings oppose human sacrifice, and he seeks to teach humanity you must not kill fellow human beings. That's a terrible crime. If you want to sacrifice, sacrifice flowers, sacrifice fruits. This is the peaceful and beautiful teaching of Quetzalcoatl. And it's fascinating that the earliest image of Quetzalcoatl does come from the Olmec site of La Venta, where we see this figure that is called man in serpent, where you see the coiled figure of a serpent with the plume, with the feathered head, and within it a man holding one of those man bags that we find in Sumer and we find in Göbekli Tepe and elsewhere.
The idea of Quetzalcoatl as a serpent being seems to be apparent in such groups as the Incas and the Mayans. Is this more proof that they all were influenced by the same god? How then did the Aztecs twist the teachings and the wisdom? Graham Hancock suggests that according to the legend, another prominent god then steps in to drive out Quetzalcoatl and assume leadership of the Aztecs.
You see, Quetzalcoatl, after performing his civilizing mission in Central America, the traditions, the myths tell us that he was driven out of the region. And as he leaves, he promises that he will return, and that he will overthrow the cult of the war god.
Who was this usurper? The war god, Huitzilopochtli.
He's a very dark god, to be honest. And yet, in contrast, you have Quetzalcoatl. Now, he's the feathered serpent. His colours are bright, blues and greens. And he was a vegetarian, and he did all the good things. He civilized the world. So it's almost like there's some kind of dualism going on between these two gods.
Quetzalcoatl's antagonist is Huitzilopochtli. You can translate his name as hummingbird. We think of hummingbirds as very sweet little things, but they're very determined and they're very fast, they are a perfect symbol of the manifestation of will, the ability of a hummingbird to stay still in one place with its wings moving at incredibly high speed. So it's perhaps not surprising that something apparently pretty like the hummingbird is chosen as the avatar of the god of war.
Where did this god come from? Could this be another otherworldly being inserting itself into the programming of the Aztec culture? Originally, he was of little importance before the migration to Mexico. But after Quetzalcoatl's departure, the Aztecs reformed their religion and put Huitzilopochtli at the same level as Quetzalcoatl, making him a solar god. It is Huitzilopochtli that directed the Aztecs to leave Aztlan and find a new home. Huitzilopochtli also left specific instructions on how they would find their new home.
When you listen to what the Aztec elders say today, was that the leader of the tribe, before they left Aztlan, had a vision. In the vision, a god appeared to him and told him that he had to travel south with the tribe till they came across an eagle sitting on a barbed tree eating a snake. And eventually they made their way into Central America. And what they found was an eagle sitting on a cactus, and it was literally eating a snake, and they took that as a sign of where they were going to settle.
And this is indeed apparently what they saw on this journey. You know, they saw this cactus, they saw the bird, and in its talons was this snake, and this is where they stopped. And it was in a middle of a lake, an island in the middle of a lake, and this is where they built this great city, which became the center of the Aztec Empire.
Built on the fertile island of Lago de Texcoco, the great city became known as Tenochtitlan. Today, this is the site of the bustling metropolis, Mexico City. If the imagery of an eagle eating a serpent feels familiar, the symbol is used today on Mexico's flag. But could it have a much more ancient meaning? Some scholars, like Jack Carey, believe this symbol is rooted in an ancient conflict between otherworldly forces.
Perhaps it was a time when the ancient serpent lineage became lesser than this new royal bloodline that had emerged as the Aztec royalty.
They continue to worship the god of war, and over the next few hundred years, their empire thrives, despite an increase in bloodshed and the use of human sacrifice.
What's fascinating is that eventually the Aztecs take on human sacrifice as a way of appeasing this god. They tell us that they were sacrificing humans in order to retard the movement of the sun into the next zodiac house. That is the precessional movement of our sun. Why they were trying to retard the movement of the sun into the next zodiac house was because it was this movement that they equated with being the mechanism that caused global calamity on the earth. They thought by appeasing the sun through human ritual sacrifice, they could slow its movement down in such a way that they could avoid the next global cataclysm.
They believed Huitzilopochtli was in a constant struggle with the darkness and required nourishment in the form of sacrifices to ensure the sun would survive the cycle of 52 years, which was the basis of many Mesoamerican myths.
They sort of somehow began to misread the ancient teachings, what the ancient concept of the gods were there for. They were there as metaphors, they were there as teaching aids to help, the individual rise above his or her own, base living situation. It was about raising your level of awareness. What the Aztecs began to do, which is often what happens with so many old cultures, they began to take these things literally. So when they start looking at their war god and saying, I am your war god, in order for the Aztec to go on being who they are and go on surviving for thousands of years, if you appease me by doing blood sacrifices and ritual, I will make sure that you're protected from future darkness. You will always be protected from darkness. The evil spirits will never come and infiltrate your lives ever again.
I feel that the Aztec were terrified that their gods had left them. And so this act of violence, this killing people and, sacrificing people to appease the gods, it's a practice that we've seen in many places around the planet. And I feel that they felt abandoned by everyone. They were angry about it. And this was their way of showing the world that they were powerful, even though they were very fearful.
But could their fear of darkness have finally caught up with them? Not even their precious God could have saved them from what was about to happen next. In 1519, a ship arrives on their shores and a strange, white, bearded man introduces himself.
And eventually Cortez comes to the Aztec people, and the only other time that they had seen a creature with a beard was on their god Quetzalcoatl. And here is a Spaniard wearing a long beard with amazing armor, and they were riding these incredible creatures, the horses that they brought with them.
When Cortez comes on those beaches and has a beard and is white-skinned and hair, so the people who have been worshiping and waiting for Quetzalcoatl, they transfer their energies to Cortez, and Cortez from Europe, and is not a god.
Led by his faith, the Aztec Emperor Montezuma initially greets Cortez and his conquistadors with open arms.
He's thrown into a state of hysteria by the arrival of Cortez. It's fascinating looking at the documents from the period. Both the Aztecs and the conquistadors kept detailed records to get a sense of the state of mind of Moctezuma. How terrified. He was a bully, he was an aggressive, domineering dictator. But when he thought he was facing a returning god, his knees turned to water. He ceased to have any courage or confidence whatsoever. And Cortez very quickly learned about this and took advantage of it and played upon it and used it as part of his psychological game to overthrow the Aztec Empire and take from them everything that they had. Of course, Cortez was no god of peace. Cortez was no Quetzalcoatl. Cortez was only there for one thing. He was there to take everything they had. He was there to destroy utterly their culture. But he took advantage of and rode upon that myth on his way in. And in the first encounter, direct encounter between Moctezuma and Cortez, this matter is raised directly, and Moctezuma asks him, "Are you truly Quetzalcoatl?" And Cortez actually says, "No, I'm not." But you see, he was being clever there because the deities of ancient Mexico were tricksters. So that's exactly what Moctezuma would expect him to say. Yes, you are Quetzalcoatl. Moctezuma did the work in his own imagination. It's a very curious and extraordinary moment in human history, seen at the time as the fulfillment of a prophecy. But what was it really? It was the doom. It was the doom of the ancient cultures of Central America.
What was really at play here? Was it the belief in certain gods as more powerful than themselves? Or could the demise of the Aztec people by Cortez in 1519 have been a battle for humanity based on warring extraterrestrial forces still at play in our world thousands of years later? Could the killing off of a great civilization be the last remnants of ancient knowledge practiced on the planet? The evidence of ancient powers still at work can be reflected by an internal search that the Spanish priesthood performed. They were very concerned with how this civilization fit into their understanding of God and creation, and they sent missionaries to Mexico to dissect it. Could their creation stories be linked? These concerns may have arisen from research documents like the Auburn Codex, which was compiled by a Dominican friar named Diego Duran in the late 1500s.
Yes, the discovery of the Auburn Codex and its resulting translation showed an extremely close similarity between the Sumerian creation stories and the creation stories of the Mesoamerica people. And those creation stories speak of a pantheon of gods who ended up creating man, not a single god, as was being professed by the church at that time. And because of that, a lot of the information was suppressed. They saw such close similarities between the two that to a lot of them, they sort of scared them and said, oh my gosh, when people see the similarities, they're going to think, well, mankind was created by these creatures, by the Anunnaki, by the serpent gods, and not by the one true God in Christianity.
What would happen to the belief systems of the world if we realized we came from the same creation? And even more disturbing, what if these belief systems were being used by warring races for their own agenda?
One of the most shocking discussions I ever had in my professional career was in New York City in 1984. And I got a phone call at my office one day from a man. We had a discussion about the ancient civilizations on Earth, including the Garden of Eden, that had nothing to do with Homo sapiens sapiens. It all had to do with extraterrestrials, and extraterrestrials that were in war. I was shocked at the level and depth at which this man told me details tying our ancient civilization to extraterrestrials who warred with each other, and that we ourselves may be concerned about the return of any of them.
If this is true, is there more evidence of a secret agenda in the research these priests did? More intriguing parallels can be found in a Spanish research document written by Friar Bernardino Sahagún during the 1500s. Known as the Florentine Codex, it also details the history and culture of the Aztecs. Based on decades of research compiled by Sahagún, the document reached some startling conclusions. So startling, in fact, that the Florentine Codex was never published.
Let's put this into context. We're in the middle of the medieval era in Europe. So we have a culture that's based on plunder, destruction, and the complete subjugation by a particular religious order. From this culture emerges a group of Spanish people who ride all the way across the Atlantic. They land in Central America, and they are totally amazed to find that these supposed morons and barbarians, and they were barbarians, by the way. I mean, human sacrifice is not an enlightening thing. But they found, quite to their amazement, that their stories and their myths actually sounded very much like the stuff that was already in the Bible, which back in Europe was the high point of civilization, okay? So they began to write these things down, and the more they wrote and the more they listened to the Aztecs, the more they realized that their myth really preceded Christianity. Now we have a problem, because when you start describing the god Quetzalcoatl, who basically was born of a virgin in a cave. He goes AWOL for 40 days into the wilderness, goes on top of a sacred hill, preaches religion to the masses, then is nailed figuratively to a cross, not literally, gets up 3 days later after he crosses into the other world around the 21st of December and is resurrected as a god-man, after which he's deified as a hero. That story was already around. So, being a priest in the middle of all of this, I would have gone, oh dear, oh Susanna. We have a bit of a problem, Houston, because now it means that everything that's in the Bible, everything that we've been worshipping in Europe is actually much, much older. So they put one and one together and they realized, my God, this stuff is almost like what the Sumerians were saying in 3000 BC.
The Codex is presented to the church, but predictably, they wanted nothing to do with it.
And only today we begin to realize that the old world, as we called it, was actually much more ahead than what Europe was professing at the time.
Could the ancient knowledge from Quetzalcoatl have been given to the Aztecs? If so, did the Aztecs pervert this knowledge? And could another influence have stepped in, disguised as the war god Huitzilopochtli? If this is true, is this more proof that the demise of the Aztecs might have been played out by a supernatural and otherworldly force left behind by these gods?
We have to ask ourselves, is it possible that these two beings who allegedly came from the stars are actually two otherworldly beings in conflict? Is it possible that we're looking at two creatures who are not friendly towards each other? Is it possible that we're actually looking at two different deities or two different otherworldly beings? In my opinion, and if we take a look at ancient texts, mythology, and everything the ancient Aztecs and Mayans left behind, the answer is a yes.
A possible takeaway from the destruction of these people and their culture could be that there are greater forces on Earth battling behind the scenes, manipulating our societies and turning them against each other. Could the need for Quetzalcoatl and his ancient lineage have become extinct at some point? And could the fear of the unknown have invited another type of otherworldly force on this planet? If we are always waiting for a new force to guide us, like the arrival of Cortez seen as a god, are we missing the human potential to create a new world by the understanding that we are all connected to the same creation? If we return to ancient lineages like the legend of Aztlan, do we find more answers? Experts like Freddie Silva point to a connection to a star system that has infiltrated almost all ancient civilizations.
In terms of the connection to Sirius, is the fact that Sirius was always regarded as a source of wisdom, of high wisdom. Whether it was brought here through shamanic means or by actual physical beings that came here from Sirius, that's not the matter. I think both lines of inquiry are actually true.
Could there be an even more ancient lineage trying to change the human code? Up next, we trace the Sirius connection from a tribe in Mali to the mystery schools of Egypt.